and welcome to Preemie Chats, a space where we connect, learn, and share stories about the world of prematurity. I'm Leah Whitehead. I'm the proud preemie parent of Tessa and a former journalist. I'm so honored to have you join us here today. Preemie Chats is brought to you by Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. You may also know them as CPBF. It's a charitable organization dedicated to supporting families, advocating for the needs of premature babies, and providing the latest information and resources to help parents and caregivers navigate this journey. Whether you're a parent, a healthcare professional, researcher, or someone interested in understanding more about preterm birth, you're in the right place. Together, we're building a supportive community where stories are shared, questions are answered, new evidence is explored, and no one feels alone. Be sure to visit our website. It's there on the screen, canadianpreemies.org. And there you'll find helpful resources, our latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who want to see our little babies thrive. And if you're watching live today, please join the conversation. Share your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll address them during the program today. If you're watching a recorded session, you can still connect with us through our website. And it is through meaningful discussions like this that we advance practice and grow together. So please let us know where you're watching from today and share your personal experience. Today, I have my own personal experience. I know my husband, James, he experienced NICU differently than I did, and that only makes sense. And many of us anecdotally know this to be true, but it's not an area that is widely studied. So today, we're going to hear about some specific qualitative research looking at the dad's experience in NICU. Fathers' experiences are often overlooked, as mothers are often prioritized over fathers. So we'll explore today parenthood and the disruption of a NICU admission to that journey, and how family integrated care may improve the experiences of fathers in the NICU. Of course, I'd like to note as well that we recognize that there are other potential parents in NICU beyond the traditional father role and various support people who are very important to the NICU journey. But today we're going to be looking specifically at the niche group of fathers. To present this topic today, we're joined by clinical assistant professor at the University of Alberta in the Department of Pediatrics and the Division of Neonatal-Perinatal Medicine, Dr. Amy Shafey. She is also the medical director of the Northern Neonatal Follow-up Clinic, and her interests include the long-term neurodevelopmental outcomes of preterm infants, family engagement, and family integrated care in the pre and post NICU setting. She has a Master's of Science in Clinical Epidemiology, and her thesis topic was Father's Experience in a Family Integrated Care Program. She is also a member of the National FICare Committee in Canada, involved primarily with the national promotion of FICare, Family Integrated Care. She currently resides in Edmonton with her 3 children, husband, and greyhound. Please join me in welcoming Amy with us here today. Thanks for joining us, Amy.
Thank you, Leah.
I will let you get right to your presentation. I know you have a lot of ground to cover today.
Sounds good. Thank you so much to the Canadian Preterm Birth Foundation for inviting me here today. This is such an important topic, but also just as a plug that we often in our clinic, we watch the Preemie Chat videos as part of our trauma-informed care education for our healthcare professionals. So this is quite an honor for me. So just as you had said, my master's thesis involved looking at the experiences of fathers in an Alberta Family Integrated Care program. And this was supported in part by the University of Calgary and the Alberta Innovates Foundation, Alberta Health Services, and Covenant Health. Before I start any presentation, I just think it's very important for me to note that living here in Edmonton is actually Treaty 6 territory in the Métis Nations of Alberta, Districts 9 and 10, and I exist here as a settler, and this continues to be and will always be the ancestral and traditional territory to many peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Dakota, Saulteaux, and Métis. And I'm aware that this land rightfully belongs to the various First Nations of Turtle Island. Today, hopefully, the takeaways that you'll get is to actually identify barriers of positive experience of fathers in the NICU, to describe 3 ways that FICare may improve the experiences of fathers in the NICU, and to look at future practice implications and potential for further research. Really, the goal for today is actually just to raise awareness about fathers in the NICU and how FICare might be able to support them. So just as Leah had alluded to, fathers are just very different than mothers. And when we've actually looked at research, looking at fathers and their experiences of parenthood, when they first discover the news of having the potential of having a child, they approach it with fear, excitement, and joy, and they wish to establish an immediate bond. And quickly, even prior to the baby or child being brought into the world, fathers experience an antenatal shutout, in that antenatal visits are targeted towards mothers and fathers during the day, during the work day, while fathers are often at work. And this continues on after birth, and fathers continue to express that they lack skills and knowledge in terms of being able to take care of their child. They're often struggle with having a work-life balance, not being able to take time off to be able to be with their child, and being kind of left behind as a result of it. They struggle with a changing relationship with their partner as babies as made to be in the center. And overall, and the general theme for fathers is that they just struggle to find a role and kind of their place in the new family dynamic. Fathers, though, are extremely, extremely important in infant development. Fathers provide this heightened, arousing, playful environment that is very different than the more quiet activities that are enjoyed by mothers. And fathers who show active engagement, involvement, or cohabitate with their partners have children who are at a lower odds of having behavioral problems. These children also are more likely to have enhanced cognitive development, and this is actually shown to be particular in infants with medical risk. And also importantly is that mothers their affect are mediated by fathers in involvement. So mothers who have fathers who are actively engaged and involved report less stress and more marital satisfaction, and also more family satisfaction. So that's a typical experience of just entering parenthood. But the NICU, as you know, as we all know, disrupts that linear progression into parenthood. And when fathers are asked about their experiences of just entering the NICU and just their experiences in general, and having a traumatic childbirth, they're often feel as they have fear and helplessness and horror. There's a general sense of lack of control, and fathers tend to seek comfort and have lower stress with the sense of control. But in the NICU environment and being entered into the NICU, they lose that control. They often see themselves as these overseers, protectors, the earners for the family, and this has been stripped away from them. When they have their baby in the NICU and they see them either being in an incubator, being held, or being taken care of by the medical staff, fathers often fear doing harm through physical interactions. They also feel that the lack of information is exclusive to them, as often information is passed primarily to mothers, and mothers often have to pass secondary information back to fathers rather than them receiving the information directly. But fathers require this information to regain the control that they've lost following an admission to the NICU. They often feel isolated as mothers take precedence, and this is in every level of the NICU, down to often at the bedside, there's generally only one chair, and that chair is for the mother, and there's not another for the father. And this continues on post-discharge in terms of the father's ability to parent, and their feeling of confidence and competence is stripped away, as they've not had the same amount of exposure or education as mothers might have. When you review the literature, and particularly in infants who are this moderate to late preterm, this 32 to 34 plus 6 weeks gestational age, there's very, very limited data on the father's experience with these infants, and also limited data on interventions to be able to support them in the NICU. And those interventions that have been looked at really lack generalized ability. They lack definitions of what they've actually measured in terms of outcomes. And then ideally, there would be a study of interventions that integrate all the components shown to benefit fathers. And this would include things like physical contact, as skin to skin has been shown to reduce stress in fathers and increase their engagement. Caregiving and education around skills required for infant caregiving. And there really hasn't been any one study that has integrated all of these factors. So this is where FICare comes in. So FICare nationally in Canada, if you may or may not know, it's called Family Integrated Care, and it was brought overseas to Canada, first trialed as a pilot study at the University of Toronto, Mount Sinai. And that FICare has 4 pillars that looks at staff education, the NICU environment, parental support, and psychosocial support. This study was done in Alberta, and Alberta has kind of a modified FICare model that was created upon the advice of healthcare providers in Alberta to kind of suit the environment of the NICUs here in Alberta. And so this is kind of truncated into three pillars, looking at relational communication and how parent and provider roles are decided, and how parents are involved and communicated with. Parent education, and this would involve bedside teaching as well as group education. And then parental support, and this includes psychosocial support, journals that were given to families, as well as parking passes, and also screening for postnatal depression. So my research question really involved looking at what were the experience of fathers of preterm infants born 32 to 34 plus 6 weeks gestational age that were admitted to a level 2 NICU and enrolled in a cluster randomized control trial evaluating Alberta FICare. So on the left here just describes the trial, which was a cluster randomized control trial of 10 level 2 NICU sites across Alberta. And these level 2 sites were randomized to either receiving Alberta FICare or standard care. And caregivers of infants born 32 to 34 plus 6 weeks gestational age were enrolled. Mothers were enrolled as long as they were present for 6 hours per day. They received group education and support from nursing, as well as the pillars that I had shown previously. And they're also given a journal for which they could write into. My study starts in the second column, where at 2 months in the corrected gestational age, a newsletter was sent out and phone calls were given to the mothers who were interested in any further research, and question asking whether or not the fathers would be interested in being approached for a study. And the fathers that we recruited were biological fathers of infants whose mothers were enrolled in the Alberta FICare study, and they also spoke English. So really what this means is that non-traditional parental families were not included, as well as infants who were palliative or had severe congenital anomalies or were apprehended. It's not to say that these experiences are not important. It was just more that this was purposive sampling to be able to capture fathers who shared very similar characteristics to be able to create or to be able to analyze the data more accurately, as the experiences of these other family units would likely be unique and different to that of these fathers. Once we recruited these fathers, we gathered demographic information, and each one of them underwent a semi-structured interview. And we continued to interviews until there was no further information that was being gathered from the interviews. A secondary aspect of what we did was we looked at the journal entries, and interestingly enough, 10% of the journal entries were written in by fathers themselves. And so the journal entries of those fathers were analyzed as well for themes. So the methodology was qualitative research methodology. And if you're unfamiliar with qualitative research, it provides a very rich way of looking at the lived experience of these fathers. In the process, these fathers all went like I said, they went through semi-structured interviews that were transcribed. And their interviews were read and reread multiple times. And while reading it, we looked for codes or frequent kind of similarities with frequent themes that kind of came up. And they were all coded. Each of the interviews were codes, and those codes were put together into themes. And something of note to point out, if it hasn't already been obvious, is that I am obviously a female. I'm a neonatologist. I'm not a father. I'm not a father of a preterm infant in the NICU. And so it was really important to look at the validity of this information. And when the themes were generated, they were actually given back to the fathers who had done the semi-structured interview to see if the themes were in line with what their interviews had suggested. And we had gotten agreement. The themes that were created from the semi-structured interview needed to be triangulated with that of the journal entries to be able to create overarching themes. So these were the findings. So the vast majority of fathers that were included were married, had approximately 2 children. The gestational age is around 33 to 34 weeks. They were all employed, and the mean income was over $80,000 for the vast majority. This is what I mean by triangulation. So essentially, when we had taken the semi-structured interviews, fathers might describe their early delivery experience, and it might have differed if it was an expected early delivery versus not. And the journal entries were very similar in that fathers who had an unexpected early delivery would write about that in their experiences versus those who did not. And this all kind of goes along with the same, with the sub-theme that mental preparation affects the emotional experience of an early delivery, found both in the journal entries as well as the semi-structured interviews. So these are the 7 generated themes, and I'll go through each one of them. The first is the sphere of the unknown, and this goes throughout the pre-NICU experience up until the post-NICU experience. So the codes that you see on the left here is that in the pre-NICU experience, it had to do more to do with the birthing environment. That for the dads, that this was an overwhelming experience. There was many individuals in the birthing environment, and there was really uncertainty of the birthing outcome about having a baby that's born preterm, because this is unexpected. And then once they're in the NICU, it's just the fear of the unknown of medical complications. You know, what does it mean to have jaundice? What does it mean to have these, alarms beeping? What does all of this mean? And what the medical realities of having a preterm infant versus a baby that you take home at term. And then the post-NICU experience is this stressful awareness of the lack of medical oversight. Suddenly they're on their own and really not sure what that means. And so this filters into kind of a sub-theme where this urgency in the pre-NICU environment really creates the supports the feeling that this situation is quite serious, and that these concerns kind of continue in the NICU surrounding having a preterm infant, and then you continue to worry about these infants well after the NICU stay. And it really comes down to the overarching theme that the fear of the unknown creates an emotionally terrifying experience. These are a couple of examples of quotes that fathers had said or had written. First here, as soon as she was born, we were instantly worried about baby. She was healthy enough to spend an hour with us. It was rather scary seeing her with all the tubes, IVs, and sensors attached to her tiny body. While the hospital staff was reassuring us that everything seemed okay, we had a hard time believing, since we had never encountered anything like this before. We would be by her side and patiently observed every minute of her first day or the remainder of. He was in there for so long, but still a lot of complications that we knew could happen. And the concern was always, I guess, nagging about what could or, could not happen. And this describing the NICU discharge, we were well prepared to go home as best as you can be, but that drive taking the kids out of the hospital and putting them in the van, or that first drive home, was the most nervous experience of my life. Well, you got these 2 lives now that are totally dependent on you, right? And they've never been in a car before and all that other stuff. So it's like, oh my God, we're not committed, right? We don't have all this help. The next overarching theme really goes around mental preparation. So the pre-NICU experience, as I've alluded to before, is around the delivery, and that those fathers who were expected to have an early delivery had greater preparation and were more mentally prepared, and it really impacted their emotions and their affect and their anxiety at the time of delivery. Versus for those fathers who it was completely unexpected, it also impacted their emotions, but that with surprise and fear. And if you had an expected delivery, you would have been fortunate enough to have some NICU preparation around expectations of having a baby in the NICU, and also logistical onboarding things like, where do you get parking from? How long will they stay in the hospital for? And support from social work. And then in the NICU environment, a lot of the mental preparation is around, what they do in the NICU, their child's achievements, and, their readiness to actually go home. And so this really whittles down to 3 sub-themes of, preparation for an early delivery, preparation for a NICU stay, and preparation for a discharge home. And that this mental preparation affects the emotional experience of early delivery and involves a holistic approach around infant medical care, routine process of the NICU, and events leading up to discharge. And these are a few quotes. It was kind of a bit of a shock for us. We got a call from the hospital saying to my spouse that we need to come in and clarify some blood work. We were totally blindsided when the obstetrician came in and said he needs to come out. We were just showing face shock and surprise. I had no idea what to expect or even what the NICU was at that point. And then describing just being in the NICU close to discharge, she kind of went through the whole stage of, one bed to the next, that kind of graduate them up. And then, for the last probably 5 days, I want to say she was kind of in a separate room and she was off monitors and stuff like that. And it's nice to not have to worry about, the feeding tube and the monitor cables and all that. It's more normal, like a normal human. As I talked to at the beginning of this talk about even without the NICU experience, fathers often are looking for their own role as a parent. And in the NICU, it's no different. And the pre-NICU, before baby is born or while baby is being born, fathers often have this perception of being in the way or feeling lost and out of place. But they really appreciated early involvement and being able to hold their infant at the time of delivery. And then in the NICU, fathers felt that they were a secondary parent, but their role was really to be supportive and to be information gatherers. And they really, really emphasized wanting to be involved in the NICU, and they were often searching for their role. So they were finding their place even when the baby was first born, and really wanting more involvement in NICU and equal support to their partners. So this theme really whittles down to fathers searching for and identifying their role, wanting more involvement and equal support to their partners. Parenting with supervision was another important theme. Any amount of involvement or encouraged involvement by the bedside staff was seen as a positive. And this supported independence, increased their comfort, and reduced anxiety. And an inclusive environment and nursing attention was seen very much as a positive. But this parenting with supervision could also be seen as a negative, in that fathers felt that they often needed permission to parent and they wanted more independence. And also the physical environment was a barrier if space was not made for them. So fathers support and benefit from parenting with supervision in a positive NICU environment that encourages parental independence. And this is where we start seeing differences between the standard care group and fathers who are actually in the FICare group, is this parenting with supervision. So in the standard care group, a father had said that first little bit was a little bit rough to kind of find what the proper routine should be. Because at the same time, we want to be there, but there's also, when he was feeding on the feeding tube all the time, there's not, other than holding him, there's not much we can do. And some of the nurses kind of made it seem like it was an inconvenience for them to bring him out of the isolette to allow us to hold him. Other nurses were a lot more easy about it and definitely encouraged it. So we're trying to balance out, are we interfering with them? I know they have a busy schedule and lots of babies to look after versus wanting to care and be there for our child. Whereas in the intervention group, a lot more fathers had a different viewpoint. The ability that we had to be a little bit closer with a couple of nurses, because they would come and, check on him specifically and take more of an interest because of the FICare program. They wanted to follow up and different things like that. So I'm given that if we were in the same situation again, for sure, we would absolutely sign up again. My nurses they were all upfront with everything that it was. If we need something, we'd go get it. If you need this, you go get it. It helps speed up. It was good. We were basically parenting with supervision for 9 days while we got ready to go home. We were starting to get comfortable picking the twins up now without relying on the nurses to pass them off to us. This was a big step since we were hesitant. Effective communication was an extremely important theme amongst fathers, and this started even prior to the NICU stay. And so at the time of delivery, which was, as described, but can be quite a difficult and rushed birthing experience, fathers who had communication around medical care saw that as positive experience, but when they had a lack of communication, it really created a barrier and it created a negative experience. And the communication really actually helped ease uncertainty around the delivery and birth of their child, and provided increased assurance by medical care. In the NICU, fathers described if they had medical staff that were knowledgeable, gave a personal touch and attention, were supportive and reassuring. This was seen as being a positive, but perceived mistreatment really impacted their experience with the medical staff. Communication, explanation, engagement, and information gathering was really important to fathers, as they saw themselves as the information gatherers. And this continued towards discharge, being just communication about discharge and the support for discharge has allowed them to have the preparation for people to go home. So fathers rely on effective communication to gather information to help reduce their anxiety, facilitate their support role for their partners, and to gain trust with the medical team. Just a few more quotes from a FICare father. And then because he was earlier, there was extra people in there. I knew that they were basically explaining what they were doing, and they were good at that, explaining everything that was going to go. We're going to go get to do this, and then we'll take him there. Reflecting back now, I can't believe that even with everything going on, time was still made for Dad to cut the cord, as well as to have continuous communication on what was happening and why. Somehow it was extremely calming and reassuring. The post-NICU transition is stressful for many families for a variety of reasons. But for fathers, was specifically touched on was just this awareness of the lack of medical oversight, and not just having a baby who's no longer off monitors or having a bedside nursing. It's also just the post-discharge follow-up as well. So just this need for post-NICU medical care and support. Then once home, fathers spoke a lot about having to start over and really find their own routine and adjusting to 24/7 care and just gaining the confidence to be able to do so. And so it's really just this recalibration of the care and establishing a new routine. The post-NICU transition benefits from a gradual separation from the NICU and a reintegration to home life. And this is where we also saw differences between the FICare group and the standard care group. Those who receive FICare, this is a quote from one of the fathers. But once we got home, the transition was natural because of the encouragement for kangaroo care and feeding and changing and doing regular things for him. He didn't feel like a stranger by any means when we got home, and he was our son. So I think there's a lot of positive stuff that happened at the NICU that helped with that transition. For the standard care group, so it's probably like a month and we kind of got into a rhythm. It's like all those things like double checking car seats, just not having the confidence yet, like, feeling the bath water. The last a major theme for fathers that came out really was just about family support, family life, and balancing work, hospital, and home life. So fathers often spoke of the impact of external support, whether or not they had it or had not, kind of impacted their ability to meet demands. They often felt like they were split between the home and being in the hospital, and they're really just trying to establish a routine. And this also just impacted their relationship with their partner. And so often fathers describe having to work through challenges of stress and fatigue on their relationships, that they did see this as being relationship strengthening, but really a lot of difficulties with communication and just having that physical separation was quite difficult for fathers. And then in terms of how they saw their child, it was just that they had a positive view of their child irrespective of their prematurity. And that they felt more bonded with the more involvement that they actually had in the NICU experience. But their anxiety of their health and well-being really did continue post-NICU. And so this kind of gets split into three sub-themes of just fathers trying to balance home, work, and hospital life, working with their partner and their relationship with their child. So father's perspective on family life involves the balancing of competing demands between work, hospital, partner, and child. So in conclusion, fathers of preterm infants born 32 to 34 plus 6 weeks gestational age enter the NICU with heightened levels of stress, uncertainty, and fear with little expectation of the NICU environment. But they do gain confidence when they feel supported or involved and are communicated with. And this positive effect carries over post-discharge. And of note, fathers in the Alberta FICare group really did attribute their confidence and positive NICU experience to Alberta FICare. Future directions is the first is always going to be just recognizing that fathers' needs are separate from that of mothers. They're not the same. Their needs are not the same. Their concerns are not the same. And so how we approach them should not be the same. And so really there should be father-specific programs that are aimed to reduce stress and anxiety, to help increase their involvement with their infants and giving them that opportunity, and helping increase their communication with health professionals. And then lastly, the post-NICU follow-up process deserves a greater look at and improvement to help with this transition home. I just want to acknowledge the families of the moderate and late preterm infants who took part of this study, and specifically the fathers who took part of this study. That was extremely important to be able to have and to share. I would like to thank Drs. Vibhuti Shah, Dr. Karen Benzies, Dr. Reshma Amin, and Dr. Tom Stelfox, who they were all my supervisors for this master's thesis. As mentioned before, this was funded by Alberta Innovates, and this is support from Alberta Health Services, Covenant Health, as well as MINCI. And then Pilar Zanoni, Jana Kirilova, and Corinne Wilson, and the many research assistants. And then lastly, just to thank my family and the father in my life, my husband. And now I'm happy to open up for any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation and for those sharing those beautiful pictures with us. What a sweet family.
Thank you.
Um, I think, even to have neonatologists share that humanness part of yourselves, I think it's always a gift in the same way that when families share their experience, it really kind of, I don't know, just shares our humanness of experience of being
Yeah.
in NICU. I know we have an active dad watching today, and so he said homework and hospital life was so hard. Dads need to realize they are like a balloon and they need to take care of themselves so they don't pop. That's a
I
beautiful
totally
comment.
agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree. And you were not alone, that all the fathers had said the same thing, which is very unique to the mothers, right? Like it's very, very unique to fathers to just have that kind of balance of home work. It was everything. Fathers would be like, I'm dealing with the dogs, my other children, my in-laws, this and that. Like it was quite a challenge for many fathers.
Hmm. I might have missed this in your slide with the criteria and people's kind of demographics, I guess. But did you look at how much time each dad spent in NICU and whether that impacted any part of this? Because I know as FICare, you mentioned like moms have to sign on for the 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
Was there any kind of criteria like that for the dads as well?
No, so this was all for the study, it was mothers who were recruited. So this was just us trying to get a hold of fathers who were just associated to the study through the mothers. So we don't have any of that information of how often the fathers would be able to be there and be in the NICU. And then the other thing as well is that the fathers who participated were amazing, but I have a feeling that they were fathers who had a bit more opportunity to be in the NICU a bit more than other
Mhm.
fathers, right? So
Mhm.
it's just like this is a subset of a subset of a subset. So there's still a
Right.
lot we could learn about fathers and what their needs are and how to better support them.
Mhm. I know even that, my husband is very laid back as a dad and very used to medical things, so wouldn't freak out over stuff. But I was the one who spent most of my time in NICU with Tessa. And so
Yeah.
when we got home, I remember him like waking up in the middle of the night and running over to the crib and making sure she was breathing.
Yeah.
And that was something that I said, "She's fine. She can make it through the night." And I
Yeah.
would tend to be the more,
Yeah.
worried about that kind of thing. But that to me was interesting to see, again, like you were talking about that post NICU, like the journey doesn't end at
No.
discharge.
No, it really doesn't. And I think like fathers, they really did talk about, they're all of a sudden at home on their own. And it really having the experience and having the opportunity in ICU to be a bit more involved definitely mediated the effect of what it was like to be at home. But I think overall, all the fathers, whether or not they were in FICare or not, could benefit from more support even in the post NICU stage, right? Because
Mm,
it's still that recalibration and still trying to find your role within the family unit and what you're supposed to be doing.
right. Jonathan asked, how can we support dads better?
Oh, that's a really great question, Jonathan. I mean, like, I think how we can support dads starts even before the NICU stay. Like my impression from these fathers is that as soon as they find out that they're about to have a baby, right, like I said at the beginning, fathers are even they're shut out from antenatal visits, right? And so it really actually starts even before babies are born or being brought to the NICUs, being able to involve them very early on, and in all aspects of their visit. And so how we support is it's a challenge because the first thing you have to know is what is it that dads want and what would they actually do, right? So what works for mothers might not actually work for fathers. Um, they've looked at peer support groups, but that really depends because if fathers can't take the time off to do it, But if they do have peer support groups that are, in the evenings, or maybe it's a game night, or maybe it's something that, works towards their schedule better, then that's something that they could potentially take part on. Right. And so that's actually been looked at as well. We've seen virtual versions of it because of COVID-19. We've also, there have been studies that looked at supporting fathers with just even more education, just like pamphlets or just information that can be provided for fathers, because they do appreciate having more information. But I do think a lot of it has to do with our environment as well, or how we even just approach fathers and stop thinking of them as secondary parents, even just from the beginning, right? So this to me is more of like a supporting fathers through, advocacy, and increasing awareness, right? So this, to me, it's unacceptable in an NICU environment that there's only one chair at the bedside. Like, that's not acceptable, right? Like, these are things that we need to do to change in our environment, right?
And that's sending a message.
Right, it sends a message,
Yeah.
right? In the NICU, when you're talking to families, you shouldn't just be talking to the mother, right? Like, you should be talking to both parents, right? If you impart information to a mother and you have not talked to the father, then you should be calling them. Like, that's what should be happening, right? So I do think exactly, Beth, as she's pointed out here, just this little eye contact. These are very small things that can be changed. That I think would make a huge difference, right? And for me, it's changed my practice. You don't even realize you're doing it, right? And when you feel for fathers, because they're looking for their role, and it's been, everyone else has them defer to the mother, and so they fall in line with doing that as well, but even though they don't need to, right? So it's really us too, as care providers, just changing how we approach fathers and thinking of them as equivalent to mothers. I think could go a long way. But I would love to see, more father involvement. I would love to be able to, find out more about the fathers in our collective NICU, and seeing what it is that they would want and what would work for them. And then seeing us actually pursue those kinds of projects.
Well, it sounds like other people are interested in this kind of research as well, because Judy posted, she said, wondering if you did surveys while in the NICU and post-discharge, or one survey post-discharge, because they're thinking of exploring this aspect of care in their institution.
No, I have not done that kind of survey, but we do know that looking at like the NICU discharge in general for both mothers and fathers, it's still definitely an area of weakness. Even when we've, the development of like a discharge checklist to be able to like make sure that families, complete a certain number of tasks before they go home, it's still being able to go home, and just that change in environment is still like a shock to the system for families. And so I think that would be wonderful, because that is actually an area of improvement, I think, for families and also for fathers.
And Judy's follow-up question as well was wondering if your institution has care by parent rooms as transition to home rooms, and if so, did that make a difference to their experiences?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in the level 2 NICUs and Alberta, it's varied across Alberta, and so a number of the sites do actually have single parent rooms. So they might start off in like a larger pod room, but as they're transitioning towards home, they get to be in a single parent room. And so for the fathers who actually had that experience, they would touch on it and say that that was actually a positive for them to be able to see that transition. Like, they're no longer in sort of like a quote unquote acute environment. They're now actually getting closer to home. It helps with their mental preparation to be able to go home. And then there's more opportunities for them to do all of the primary care. And then also the transition of, no longer being on monitors and that sort of thing as well. So it is varied, but for the fathers who had that experience, it was deemed as a positive.
Jonathan had another question here too, and he wanted to know, how can we help those dads who are so busy? And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but with all the other stuff, and therefore we're not present in the NICU. And I think, that is a common thing in NICU for dads to, you touched on all the responsibilities that the world kind of keeps on turning, even though oftentimes I know as a mom, my world stopped and I was in NICU and that was my focus. But what about those dads who aren't present? And I don't know, like I love the idea of calling the dads, like you said, if they're not there, make the phone call. Do you see that even happening? I don't know if
Yeah, it's a good question. So in our hospital, what I have actually seen is that, the one positive that came out of COVID-19 was the development of what we say Zoom rounds, right? And
yes.
that actually provided the opportunity to fathers of being more involved, because they could actually attend. They could be at work and then they would jump on a Zoom meeting, which was the being on rounds. And so we actually saw an uptick of the amount of fathers who got to be present for those kinds of discussions. But it really comes down, like in terms of further, discussions with fathers and calling them, that's the key. Like there's more awareness that needs to be had that this is something that we should actually be doing as standard. And then there's obviously the overarching like advocacy piece, Jonathan, just in terms of, from a governmental level, right? Like, mothers do get time off, to support, and it often goes to mothers for maternity leave, but does it really need to be shared with fathers, or can they also have their own paternity leave at the same time, right? To be able to actually, be supported and actually taking the time off, especially for families who have a baby who are in the NICU and are going to be there for a while, right? Like we should be supporting them from like a higher level of government financial support from that perspective. But then the last thing is, the ultimate question of how can we help those dads is really, it's going to come down to a huge discussion with fathers who've been through it, and for them to tell us what is it that would have worked for them, what could have helped, and then the rest of us to help develop those kinds of programs.
And you make the good point about COVID. The virtual rounds did allow dads to be more involved, but across the country, there were a lot of dads who then weren't even allowed in NICU during
100%.
COVID. And so there was the kind of birthing parent or primary parent who was there with their baby. And oftentimes the support person, who is also a parent, the dad, as we're referring to today, was told he had to leave the hospitals. And so it feels like we've even lost some ground even in the last few years.
Totally. And I feel fortunate in Alberta that mothers and fathers were able to be at the bedside during that time period. But I know that across the country, it was not like that at all. And you're totally right that trying to get it back to being able to have fathers to be more present, or being told that like, it's okay now, and so to no longer have that concern of not being able to be there. Right. So, and it's also the family unit as well, right? Like the, siblings, and also external family and support, right? Because fathers do mention like they're on their own, they're working, they're in the NICU, they're all over the place, and so when they do have external support, it's really helpful for them, and so that also means including them into the NICU environment too.
We are going to wrap up here, but in closing, so I know you had some kind of the future, but I'm wondering for yourself, what's the future for exploring this? Are you going to look at, I know you did the late preterm or mid preterm. Are you going to look at the early preterm families? Are you going to expand this research, or what's the next step for you in this?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects to it. One is like an interventional aspect, which I feel like is more of will probably be approached from like a quality improvement perspective, and getting engagement from fathers and parents to figure out what it is that fathers would like, and actually piloting it out and seeing how we could actually facilitate that, or something that we could do to actually support them in the NICU. And then from a research aspect, knowing more about this, like the early preterm infant, And also, I think it's really important to recognize that, many of the studies, you're often speaking to, a certain subset of fathers, and we, in across Canada, we have a diverse population, and we have populations of families where, like, English is not the primary language, but they have different needs. And I do think it's really important to also target families like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing your findings with us and for continuing to amplify that voice that really needs to be advocated for. And you've given some great practical tips for units and for fathers themselves and families. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me.
And thank you, everyone, for joining here today and for being a part of this important conversation. If you've missed a part of the session or you want to revisit it later, you can find this entire episodes and all of our past episodes. So we have over 300, and you can find those on our YouTube channel or again on our website, CanadianPreemies.org. And while you're there, just take a look around the website. There's lots of interesting things. There's free resources for units, for families, and there's also support options. You'll be reminded while you're there that CPBF is a charitable organization, and we love to help families on their journey. CPBF relies on generous support of people like you, and your donation allows us to continue to empower families of premature babies every step of the way. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. Thanks again for being a part of this community and for being with us here today and for sharing your voice and perspective. We will see you here next Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for another live episode